Hi everyone and welcome to SUSECon 22. My name is Amit and I'm excited to be back at SUSECon 22 with James to present SQL Server and SUSE Linux. And in this session, we are going to talk about VMs, we are going to talk about Kubernetes, we are also going to talk about SUSE Rancher, and we are going to talk about a lot many more things. With that said, I think it's time for us to go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'll start first. My name is Amit Khandelwal. I'm a senior program manager with Microsoft, leading the SQL Server containers and Linux technical strategy here at Microsoft. And I'm excited to be back at SUSECon 22. And I think you already would know all my social handles, but sharing it here again for any questions that you might have on SQL Server and containers and Linux. With that, James, over to you.
Thanks, Amit. Yeah, no, welcome to SUSECon 2022. I'm James Yang, Cloud Solutions Architect at SUSE, focused around Azure, SQL Server, and other things Microsoft as well. So I think we'll talk about the agenda next, right?
Yes, absolutely. So let's go ahead and look at the agenda. The first thing that we are going to talk about is what we spoke about in SUSECon 21 last year. So we're going to do a quick recap of the different topics we covered there. Then we are going to look at how today you can get started with SQL Server on SLES-15. Yes, we support SLES-15 now. Then we are going to talk about all new exciting SQL Server 22 that debuted and was introduced in public preview in the month of May 22, which is just a couple of weeks back. And then we are going to go ahead and look at how you can get started with SUSE Rancher and SQL Server, after which we will take a look at the different ways you can configure AD authentication for SQL Server containers and SQL Server on Linux. And also we are going to look at the key tab rotation, which is made very, very easy without the need for restart. Post which we are going to look at what are the different performance knobs. We'll also give you some of the reference articles that you can take back from this session, and you can go ahead and refer to them to get started. And last but not the least is the roadmap. So we're going to look at what we are going to come up by SUSECon 2023. So with that said, let's get started with the agenda. The first topic on the agenda was the season 1 recap, which is the SUSECon 21 recap. So if you remember, James and I, we presented that together last year. I think, yeah, that was SUSECon 21. And what did we talk about? First things first, we spoke about the different platforms where you can go ahead and deploy SQL Server, including VMs, bare metal, as well as containers. We also spoke about how you can deploy containers in Azure Kubernetes service, kind of a managed Kubernetes service, or even on unmanaged Kubernetes service, which could be Kubernetes platforms running on-prem. Then we spoke about how you can automate these deployments and some of the techniques that we spoke about. And one of the best demos that I've seen was about the Terraform. Thank you, James, for that demo, which was how you can use Terraform to go ahead and set up a SQL Server VM running in Azure. Similarly, we also saw a Helm chart demo, which was about how you can deploy SQL Server containers using Helm charts. Then we also spoke about some of the support policies that are needed or that helps you guide how you can create custom container images, as well as how you can deploy SQL Server on SLES, which is completely supported from both Microsoft as well as from the SUSE side. Then we also spoke about the way you could get started with AD authentication. And at that point of time, the tool we spoke about, AD Util, that was still in preview. And one of the promises we made was that by the time we come for SUSECon 22, we will have this in GA. And I'm happy to inform you all that this is true. AD Util is now GA and in fact integrated with MS SQL config. So we're going to see a lot more about this in today's session. Then we also spoke about how SQL Server 2019 is going to support SLES-15. So this was the second promise we made in terms of our roadmap. And I'm very excited to inform you that SQL Server supports SLES-15. And I'm very excited that the next topic that we are going to talk about is actually on how you can get started with SQL Server on SLES-15. So Today, as you would know, SQL Server 2019 supports multiple distributions, and one of them is SLES-15. We started supporting SLES-15 starting CU14, which was released last year in the month of November, and CU stands for Cumulative Update. And these are the other distributions on which we support SQL Server 2019. Apart from that, you can also go ahead and get started with Azure Marketplace image, which means you have an image that is pre-created for you, where you can just use this image, deploy this on a VM, and this will have SQL Server pre-installed for you. So you don't have to go ahead, create, add the repos, add the keys, sign the keys, and then download SQL Server and install SQL Server. All of this is done for you. All you've got to do is just use a VM, use this image, and get started with SQL Server on SLES-15. So this Azure Marketplace is also made available to you. The other part that I want to talk about is containers. SQL 2019 containers support SLES-15 base OS images, which means here is one example where I have SQL Server container, which is running on a host that is running SLES-15, and the container itself is created on the base OS image, which is also SLES-15. So if you remember the support policies, this is a completely supported solution, because your base OS operating system as well as the host OS operating system is the same, and you are running SQL Server on one of the supported configurations. So you can get started with this. Now, the question you might have for us is, how do I get started with this image? And the answer that we do have some sample references that have been updated lately. And in these sample references, you can see how to get started with a custom container image on SLES-15, as well as a custom container image for OpenSUSE. So you have both these references available that you can refer to and create your own custom script, which will give you a supported solution for SQL Server. So with that said, it's time now for us to go and look at the next topic, which is SQL Server 22. Now, SQL Server 22 is the latest version of SQL Server that we have released, and this was released as public preview in the month of May 22 and this year. So it's just been 2 weeks. And what are some of the most important features, or what's new with SQL Server 22? There's a lot of things, but if I have to give you, five top things that are very new with this release of SQL Server, the first thing is it is Azure connected, which means you can use a Azure SQL managed instance as a DR for your on-prem SQL Server. So think about this. You don't have to go ahead and set up DR instance separate. You can just go ahead and use Azure SQL managed instance, connect it with on-prem SQL Server 22 without any specific jobs or anything. All you have to do is just through few clicks, you can get connected. Similarly, you can also connect to Azure Synapse, which means you can offload your analytical workload from your OLTP. It goes to Azure Synapse, and you can have your applications connecting to your Synapse for analytical workload. And all of this without the need of an ETL job. You don't have to create those ETL jobs. All you have to do is, again, few clicks, and you can set up a link between Azure Synapse and your on-prem SQL Server 22. So isn't that cool? The other part is the Microsoft Purview. Even that now works with SQL Server 22 on-prem. So you can, and as you would know, Microsoft Purview is the governance tool that you can use to classify your data, to identify your data, as well as to set up the data lineage that you would always want to do. All of that can be inbuilt and can be just used out of the box with SQL Server 22. The next pillar that I want to talk about is the query performance enhancements that we've done. There are a ton of them that has been done for SQL Server 22. Some of them are, if you're aware of the parameter sniffing issue, I mean, that's like one of the pet peeve issues of most of the DBAs out there working with SQL Server, that if you have a stored procedure which accepts multiple parameters, you could only have one plan cached for it, and that plan might have been good for one parameter that has been passed, but might not have been good for the other parameter. Now you can have more than one plan cached for the same stored procedure procedure depending upon the parameter. So you have parameter sensitive plans for stored procedures now that will be cached with SQL Server 22. Query store. This is one of the most utilized features. Query store is on by default on SQL Server 22. And we've got enough experience of this with Azure SQL DB, and that's the experience now you would get to use with SQL Server 22 as well. And by default, query store is also available on readable secondaries. I know almost all of our customers had this request that readable secondaries should have query store enabled by default. Here you go. Now you have the query store enabled by default with this. Apart from that, there are multiple other enhancements. I just don't have enough time to go through all of them, but let me go to the next pillar here, which is about security, scalability, and availability. Now, in all of these three options, one important feature I really want to talk about in under the security premise is the availability of SQL Server Ledger. Now, for those who are not aware what SQL Server Ledger is, it's the blockchain concept that is brought centrally to SQL Server. So now you can track who's changed the data, what data was changed, and you could also see if the data was tampered with. So all of that has been built inside the SQL Server itself with SQL Server Ledger. Similarly, you have crypto enhancements, you have machine key enhancements for SQL Server. So all of these security enhancements are added. Apart from that, in terms of scalability, the way in-memory OLTP for 10 TB caches that used to work is now enhanced further to give you more benefits. Similarly, on the availability side, you have multi-write availability groups that are now also works with last right of win. So there are tons and tons of new features added in each of these sections, and something that you would definitely love for every scenario that you might have. Apart from that, the fourth one I want to go about and talk is data virtualization. And this is where you basically can query data from heterogeneous sources start from your SQL Server itself using your T-SQL. So you can create external tables which now support Parquet format of data, which now support multiple data connectors. You could simply go ahead and connect to Oracle. You could go ahead and connect to other data sources and start working with that data from SQL Server as though that was another table here. And we also now support S3 based APIs. So there are lots of new features added under data virtualization polybase as well. And all of this is again documented and available for reference. Last but not the least is the T-SQL expansion that we've done. The time series functions that you could use with Azure SQL Edge, now you can use with SQL Server 22 on-prem. The T-SQL system functions have been enhanced. You have now greatest, least, all of those functions added to your T-SQL arsenal. Similarly, there are enhancements to the JSON system functions that were available. So there are a lot many enhancements added to SQL Server 22. So as you can see, it's very heavily loaded, a lot of new features, and we are pretty much giving you a end-to-end set where you could run your analytics, DR, T-SQL, query intelligence, all of that together with SQL Server 22. With that said, I think it's time for us to come back and look at how today you can go ahead and deploy SQL Server using Rancher. So last time we saw Terraform, we saw Helm chart. Now it's time for us to look at Rancher in action to deploy SQL Server containers. And for that, I would have to request my colleague James to go ahead and give us more information on this. James, over to you.
Okay, of course. So we get to talk about deploying SQL Server with SUSE Rancher now. Before that, I just want to do a quick intro to Rancher. And to start that off, kind of want to show this. So, do you recognize this diagram? This is from the CNCF. There's something like 1,000 boxes on this page, and this is the landscape of the kind of cloud native landscape right now. And this landscape is actually getting more complicated each year as more funding gets added to this space. And so how do you kind of navigate this complexity? And this is kind of one of the reasons why kind of Rancher was kind of built. And this is where Rancher kind of comes in, right? So it's an enterprise grade container management platform for Kubernetes clusters. It does many things, but I think its strongest point is making Kubernetes easy for everyone, commoditizing it. And here is a one pager on SUSE Rancher. It's essentially a single management plane for all your Kubernetes clusters. It can do full lifecycle management of your Kubernetes clusters, including creating them, upgrading them, modifying them, or even deleting them if you wanted to. Authentication, it can handle authentication all by itself, or it actually works with a lot of external authentication providers like Active Directory or GitHub even. So um, it can also do backup or restore of the management cluster itself, monitoring or logging with Prometheus and Grafana. That's all built in. Managing RBAC policies, network policies. You can also create cluster templates to kind of save and standardize the clusters that you kind of deploy, and also enforce what other users can also deploy as well. You can also practice GitOps with Fleet. This is a CD solution that's also built into Rancher as well. There's also the Rancher catalog, aka Apps and Marketplace. And then finally, it also can do CIS benchmark scanning for CIS compliance. We don't have a lot of time to kind of cover all of these today, but I just wanted to focus on one here, the Rancher catalog. So what is the Rancher catalog? Essentially, it's a collection of applications or Helm charts that can use to deploy an application to a cluster that Rancher manages with just a few clicks. Right? You don't even really need to know Helm to do this, and that's why it's so powerful, right? And Rancher manages a set of these for some core functionality, like the CIS benchmark, logging, backups. But we also work with lots of different partners who've kind of built solutions, and they kind of integrate this into Rancher and contributed their apps as well. And you can also deploy them in the same way like you do with some of the Rancher solutions. Some of the partners I've kind of worked with, Artifactory, Datadog, and Sana KubeCost. But today we kind of want to show how you can kind of do this yourself, and we'll show you how this works. So, as a quick preface to the demo, we have a Rancher cluster here and an AKS cluster that is managing. And Rancher is actually running on AKS itself, but actually it can run on any Kubernetes cluster. So if I already deployed these two clusters already and installed Rancher on the quote local cluster, and since it kind of takes some time to spin this up, but what we'll essentially be doing here for the demo is we'll take a SQL Server Helm chart from the repo, we'll add it to Rancher, and then we'll deploy it to the cluster. So let's see this now in an actual demo. Okay, so I'm just gonna bring up the Rancher dashboard here, log in. You can see here that there are two clusters, a local cluster and a JY SQL cluster. The local cluster is where Rancher is installed on. It happens to be on the AKS cluster. And I've also used Rancher to deploy a new cluster, another AKS cluster that we're calling JYSQL. And this is what we call a downstream cluster. And this is where we're going to deploy SQL Server to. So let's go into here. Some basic metrics and a dashboard here. Let's go over to Apps and Marketplace, the charts. You can see a bunch of charts here, right? So the blue ones are the ones maintained by Rancher. Orange ones are partner contributed charts. But we can also add our own, and that's what we want to do today. So let's open up a browser to the MS SQL Docker repo. And here, we've already pre-created a Helm chart for Rancher along with a questions.yaml file. And this is essentially a list of the options that will be presented to the user during the wizard install. Just wanted to get the GitHub URL here. Go back to Rancher and then repositories. Going to create. Let's give it a name here. How about SQL Server Docker SQL Server repo? Paste the URL. Great. and it is pulling the repo here. Refresh. Okay, so it's done scanning the repo. Let's go back to charts. You can see that there's a new chart added here for the repo that we just added. I'm gonna click this. It's the README install. This namespace is fine. Let's give it a name here. How about SUSECON 22? Next, here are some options here that we saw from the Helm chart. The EULA, we would definitely want to accept that. We don't have a product key. Developer edition is fine. Then we need to generate a password. So let's go to here, password generator, copy this, I'm gonna paste it here. And also save this because we're gonna need it later on. And then the rest of these are okay. I'm gonna install now. Okay, so it started the Helm deployment. This might take a few minutes here, but we should be able to take a look at the components here and to the YAML file. So this is the actual components of the app that's deploying. And we should be able to see the resources as soon as it's done deploying. Here is the README that we saw earlier. Then back to the resources here. Okay, so it looks like it's deployed, and we can see the components that it's created. A config map to configure SQL Server, a secret to store that password, along with a service so we can connect to it, and then the actual stateful set where SQL Server is deployed. Let's go back over to the deployment. Okay, so yeah, so we see the deployment has finished here. So now we should be able to connect to it. I'm going to do this using a container that Microsoft maintains, the SQL Server Tools container. Just want to get a reference to the container. Copy this, and then go back to Rancher, and then a deployment. I'm going to create a new deployment. Let's call this Tools. Take the image that we just had. Go with if not present. And then get a command so I can shell into this later. Great. Okay, so it looks like it was done. Now we should be able to shell into this. Let's see if SQL command is here. Okay, so it looks like it's already been installed. Now we can just try connecting. I'm going to grab the name of the service here from our Helm deployments. So it was SUSECON 22 SQL Server Rancher with the SA user and then the password. I saved it here. Okay, so it looks like we're in. So we just deployed the, so to summarize, we deployed the SQL Server application with Helm from the Apps Marketplace. And then we deployed a deployment with the MS SQL Tools container. We shelled into it, and then we were able to connect successfully to the deployment. So that's it for the demo. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to kick this back over to you, Amit.
Thank you, James, for that wonderful demo with SQL Server containers in SUSE Rancher. Now it's time for us to look at the next topic in the agenda, which is about AD authentication and how you can manage the key tab rotation with SQL Server 19 on SLES-15. So to get started, the first thing I would want to say is AD authentication is now made easy. When I say now made easy, since when? AD authentication is configuring AD authentication and managing it is made easy since SQL 2019 CU15. And how is that? Because we have AD util now integrated with MS SQL config. So how does that make a difference? Here, take a look at how you had to go ahead and enable AD authentication for SQL Server. And this is something we also covered in SUSECon 21 session, where we ran about 5 to 6 commands to go ahead and set up the AD authentication for SQL Server running on SLES or any other distribution. So you can see we first create the user, then we create the SPN, then we run 2 commands to actually configure the key tab, and then we configure the SQL Server to use the key tab and to use the SQL Server account, the domain account that's going to talk to the domain. Starting CU15, what we've done is integrated AD util with MS SQL config. So how has that helped? Now, instead of using AD util command to create the key tabs, you could just use one single command using the MS SQL config option, which is the third step, which you see here on the right hand side of your screen, which is MS SQL config, set up AD key tab, and then provide the key tab location and provide the user location. With this, you can get started. You don't have to think about what encryption algorithm you have to use, which you had to do previously. So that has made overall configuration easy. Apart from that, what else? We also now support the key tab rotation without the need of the SQL Server restart. What do I mean, and what are the steps that are involved? The best way to explain this is through a demo, and you would see how easy within 3 commands, which is 3 commands, I can go ahead, update the key tab, and then ensure that my SQL Server is not restarted. So you can rotate the key tabs during production hours, and this takes care that you don't have to face any downtime when you are doing this key tab rotation. So how do you get started? And if you want to go ahead and refer, where do you look at? All of that information is provided here in this slide. And now it's time for us to take a look at the demo. Welcome to this demo. In this demo, I'm first going to go ahead and show you a quick overview of TuneD profile. And we're going to talk about TuneD profile in probably the next slide. But just to give you a quick idea, TuneD profile basically helps set up the OS in the best possible way so that we get the optimal performance out of the SQL Server database. So you have different TuneD profiles. You have throughput performance for a balanced performance for different applications. But if you're running databases like MS SQL Server, then you should be going ahead and using this TuneD profile. Now, the steps to the installation of TuneD profile has already been provided in the reference slide that'll be shared with you. So you can go ahead and look there. But what I'm going to show you is quickly how easy it is to set up the TuneD profile, because as soon as you download the TuneD package, so let me go ahead and show this to you on the screen here. So if you see here, let me just open this TuneD details file. So if you see here, this is as easy. So if I want to set the current profile after the installation of TuneD, to set it to use MS SQL profile. So when you install TuneD, by default, the MS SQL profile also gets installed to it. So what you have to do is first you have to edit this TuneD config for MS SQL and edit it with the settings that are shown here. So let me go ahead and show that to you over here. So if I just do a tuned config, this is basically the setting or the configuration that you should be using for SQL Server running on Linux, including SLES-15. So what you need to do is you need to set up some specific parameters at the system level, at the CPU level. And if you see, we are also including the throughput performance overall tuned configuration. So with this setting, you can get started. And when you have the setting enabled, you should get an optimal performance for SQL Server on those environments. Now, you might ask, should I remember all of these settings? No, of course you don't. We have all of this configured and documented in our documentation, which I'm also going to be sharing with you as part of the reference slide. So you should have all those details included. We keep updating these depending upon the kernel versions that you're getting. So please keep always go ahead and take a look at it frequently to ensure that you're using the latest profiles. Great. that was about TuneD profile. Now let's come to the main part of this demo. The main part of this demo was to rotate the key tabs without the need of restart. Now to show you that, I have all my steps configured and written over here. So let's go into this folder. Now before I show you how you can rotate the key tab, quickly let me talk about the steps that you can take to enable Active Directory authentication. So let me just use Nano here. That would be probably a better way of showing. So the first thing that I'm going to use is I'm going to go ahead and key it using an account that has enough privileges to create SPNs as well as users. After creating users and SPNs, after knitting using that, I create the user and I create the SPN, which is tagged to that same user and to MS SQL service. Post which I just need to run this command MS SQL config, set up AD key tab, and then provide the path where you want the key tab to be created, and give the username. Once those information is provided, all I need to do is configure the MS SQL config to basically run, providing the key tab path and the user path. That's it. All this is needed to get you started with the Active Directory authentication. You can then go to your tool that you're used to using, which could be SSMS, ADS, or any of those, and just log in like you would do it normally on a Windows login, which is I'm using a Windows authentication. This is my host name, and I just hit connect. So just to show you this in action, when I hit connect on this, the Active Directory authentication should basically work. All right, with that said, it's now time for us to change the password because that's a security policy and we want to rotate the key tab. So how do I go about doing that? Very simple. So right now what I'm going to do is let's do this in live right now. Hopefully everything should work for us. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the files that I have. Let's open the rotate key tab. So this is the new password that I'm setting it up to. Never share your password. You don't have to provide the password like this. You can provide it through environment variable, but I'm just doing it right now. So before I run the this command, let me just quickly show you another setting where you could basically get to know what your current KVNO is and what your current key tab list look like. So I'm just going to go ahead and say where opt MSSQL secrets MSSQL key tab. So if you look here, these are the different KVNOs that I have. So the latest one I have is 4. Now when you do a change in the user account in terms of password, KVNO gets updated. That's why you would see here that I'm actually using the latest KVNO plus 1. So now I'm going to go ahead and change my password. So this is going to be the password. So I'm adding the entry inside this key tab using this command. Once I run this, oh, I don't have a KNet. So I had to first do a KNet. So I'll just do a quick KNet using an account that has enough privileges, and then run the same command. Now it should work. I want to create the required SPNs as well, entries as well. So I'm going to use this encryption algorithm, and then the next command I want to do is run this, which is again updating the password for the, so one is for the FQDN and SPN accounts, and the other that I'm going to run is for the user account itself. So as you can see, this is the user account. Just go ahead, run this. Now, if I do the same klist command, you should see the entries with KVN of 5 also added to this. And as we expected, it is already added. Now, I'm just going to go ahead, copy this password that I've used, and update this password in the Active Directory. You can do this through ADUtil, but I'm also going to go ahead and do this right away through my Windows machine, which is my domain controller as well. So this is my new password. This is the new password. I updated the password. Now I should just go ahead and try connecting using Windows authentication, and this should work. So what I'm doing is I'm just showing you again. I'm just using the same host name, Windows authentication, with the password updated in the backend. So I'll just hit connect and this should work. As you see, it is working. And now my key tab is also rotated, and I should see, if I just do a listing of KVNO, you'll see the 5 showing up here. That's it. This is as easy as just running 2 steps and updating the password on the domain controller. With that, we come to an end to this demo, and let's go to the slides. After the demo for the key tab rotation and the TuneD that we showed, it's now time for us to look at the next option or the next topic, which is how you can configure performance for SQL Server. What are the different performance knobs that you have? And we'll also look at some of the reference articles, and we would want to share them with you so that you can go back and look at them. And if there are any questions, you can definitely reach out to us. So let's get started. The first thing is some of the performance knobs. The first thing, as I showed you in the demo, was about the TuneD profile. So you can go ahead and install TuneD. With that, you will get the TuneD profile for SQL Server. You can change the configuration to something which looks like this, which is what we've seen gives you the optimal performance for SQL Server. And after you have set this, you can enable the TuneD profile to use the MSSQL TuneD profile. Apart from that, the other database configurations that you would do for SQL Server on Windows, all of that apply for SQL Server on Linux as well. For example, having database and log files on different drives, number of temdb files, and having those on different drives, all of those best recommendations and suggestions that you've been following for SQL on Windows applies for SQL on Linux as well. Apart from that, there are other read ahead settings, max sector KB settings, all of that which are given here for your reference. All of this is also important to enable FUA, which is the forced unit access. Now, this depends upon the storage, the OS, and the settings that you have at the hardware level. So you need to ensure that all of those recommendations are followed. To see all of these recommendations and to understand more about it, please refer to the link which you have here. And as you know, using FUA, and if you have an IO intensive workload, you will see, specifically for write intensive workloads, you will see at least a 50% improvement when you use the FUA bit. So our recommendation is always to enable the FUA bit, provided the OS and the hardware settings support the FUA option. And to know more about it, please go ahead and refer to this link that I have provided here. Apart from that, some of the other important reference architectures that we would like to share with you is there is a reference architecture available on how you can get SQL Server 2019 containers deployed on Kubernetes environment. Similar thing for different other Kubernetes platforms. Then you also have performance related guidelines, which we shared already, how you can use PMEMS, which is persistent memory, which provides you better performance. We also have a lot of documentation available for AD authentication, AD util. Here are some of the references for you that you could go back and read about. And apart from that, we also have some solutions available for monitoring that you can go ahead and set up using things like the Telegraph, Influx, and Grafana. So all of that is also available for you to get started. And similarly, you could also run distributed transactions in SQL Server containers. And if you want to get started, there are some references provided you with this. So I hope you have enough references to go ahead and get started. And now some promises that we would want to make so that when we come back for SUSECon 2023, we have those fulfilled as well. The first promise that we want to go ahead and make is how we are working together. So when I say we, Microsoft and SUSE, we are working together to also start supporting high availability for SQL Server on Linux containers. So this is something that we are working where you could go ahead and enable something on the lines that we already have for SQL Server containers on other platforms. So we could do this for SQL containers on SLES as well. The second part is we are soon coming up with SQL Server 22 support for SLES 15. So by the time SQL Server 22 is GA, you will see that it supports SLES 15 as well. And apart from that, one more important aspect that we are working on is making the SQL Server 2019 and 22 Azure Marketplace images available on SLES 15 so that you can get started with these images very quickly in Azure portals. With that, that's all we have for this session. And thank you so much for spending your time with us and being with us. We really appreciate it. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us on the social handles that we've shared, and we'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you once again.
Yeah, definitely thanks for joining SuseCon in our session here. Definitely check out some of the resources and that we posted in the couple slides back. And then definitely check out some other sessions. We have a lot going on here. So I think over 100 sessions. So definitely check out some other sessions. Thank you all for joining.